Hi, everybody. Granny Dot here, getting ready to read chapter 14 of Steinbeck's Ghost. Travis was surprised at how many kids volunteered to help save the library. After visits to 5 homerooms, 3 eighth grade and 2 seventh, all 12 pumpkins were spoken for. They should have brought more pumpkins. That was 1,200 flyers. He couldn't have done it without Hill. That morning, Hill was waiting for him at the usual corner and immediately started to describe his grand plan. After Travis had called last night to ask for his help, Hill stayed up late, working it all out. They'd go from room to room together and put on a little show. Make people laugh. Hill knew it was easier to get people to do things for you when they were laughing. By the time they got to school, they had it all sketched out. Travis had almost fainted with relief when Hill volunteered last night on the phone. He couldn't really imagine doing it alone, standing in front of a bunch of kids he barely knew and asking them to sacrifice their Halloween, probably their last Halloween ever, to help save a library. A dork. He would be a dork. A library dork. Fear of dorkdom wouldn't stop him. He knew that. He just didn't like the idea of being a dork on display. It wasn't that Travis considered himself a dork, or even close to being one. He was a normal enough kid, which at school meant he had some friends, got along with practically everybody, and only got picked on as much as anybody else. But he also knew that the specter of dorkdom could strike at any minute. Your standing could plummet in an instant. One good pantsing in front of a table full of girls, you were a dork. Suddenly finding a teacher calling on you to help with a project, dork. Worst of all, should the stomach flu hit and you found yourself barfing in the cafeteria, dork for life. He remembered a book he'd read late last year, another Miss Babs selection, The Chocolate War by Robert Cormier. Jerry Renault went to a scary private school, uniforms and all, and most of the time he kept his head underwater, just hoping to get by. But when the school's annual chocolate sale started, he rashly decided to go against the grain and refused to sell the chocolates. He figured a rebellion against the school's rather evil teachers would make him cool in the eyes of the students. But no. The Vigils, the school's secret society of upperclassmen bullies, decided Jerry's rebellion would not be tolerated. And Jerry became, at least for a while, the laughingstock of the school, the dork of all dorks. The threat of dorkdom waited around every corner. You just had to be careful. Part of you always on guard. And Travis was worried he might have set himself a dork trap. But he also figured that with Hill on his side, the chances of dorkdom would be lowered. Hill was too funny to be a dork. Not only that, Hill was great with adults. Okay, Big T, Hill said as they approached the main office. Let me butter him up. Hill and Travis marched into the vice principal's office before the first morning bell. And by the time the second bell rang, the vice principal, the known to be cruel Mr. Sadeo, had agreed to let them skip class and go off on their merry pumpkin way. When they left his office, Mr. Sadeo had an odd look on his face, as if his prized pony had been stolen, and he couldn't be happier about it. Miss Bab was waiting for them in the main office, the plastic pumpkins stacked on a rolling cart. She hugged Travis and Hill, and they were off. The first class was their own homeroom. The mildly insane Mr. Brock. During his history classes, Mr. Brock was known for the use of a long wooden pointer, which he turned into a rifle, or a spear, or an oar, or a telescope, whatever the lesson called for. He'd leap about the room, gesturing madly, trying to bring history to life, although most of the time he just looked crazy. Still, his classes were never boring. A few weeks earlier, Mr. Brock had made the library closing into a manic play. He became Don Quixote, tilting with his spear at the terrifying windmill monster. Don Quixote was supposed to represent the library, the windmill monster, the faceless city bureaucracy. Nobody quite understood the play, but it was funny nevertheless. When Hill and Travis rolled in the pumpkins, everyone was sitting up and paying attention. It was always good to have a break from the regular class, no matter how exciting the teacher. Mr. Brock said a few words about the library, then introduced Travis. Travis stepped in front of Mr. Brock's desk, smiled. He thought he was going to be nervous, but he found he wasn't. He guessed that if he could speak to the city council of Salinas in a jam-packed, overheated room, he could probably handle a bunch of eighth graders. Hello, he said. Thanks for listening. I want to talk to you about the public library. I've been going to the library since before I could read, and I still go there today. I bet a lot of you could say the same thing. Anyway, I could go on about all the reasons the library is closing and how many different services the library offers. Hill was making a silent blah, blah, blah gesture with his hands. Travis, as planned, shot Hill one of Mr. Brock's patented silence ray gazes. It was a perfect imitation of Mr. Brock, and everyone laughed, especially Mr. Brock. But it's better to show than tell, Travis said. So Hilario and I are going to show you, first, what the world would be like without libraries. Hill and Travis faced each other, then, slower than slow, went into an agonizing Camazotz handshake. After the handshake, they went about their Camazotz day, but this world was so tedious, so gray. Soon, both of the actors had fallen still in their tracks, unable to move. Hill popped up, beaming. "And now," Travis said, "what the world is like with libraries." Hill and Travis met on the street again with a hug instead of a handshake, and they mimed talking to each other with great animation about all the exciting things around them. Travis went off into his library day with a big smile on his face, stopping now and then to stare into the future, pondering the bounties of the world. But Hill, oh Hill, he was laughing and dancing about the room like a ballet dancer who'd had too much sugar. This wasn't Hill who was leaping about with the goofiest smile in the world. It was some other creature that inhabited his body. He was ecstatic when he did a flirty twinkle toes pirouette right in front of Mr. Brock. The entire class lost it. Travis himself broke down in great gales of laughter, tears streaming from his eyes. Hill and Travis took their bows. Mr. Brock was yelling, "Bravo! Bravo!" Travis made his pitch. He knew it was Halloween. The library needed, pretty simple, they'd still get a lot of candy. 5 people in their homeroom volunteered. After similar performances in the other homerooms, more volunteers stepped forward, and soon all the buckets were claimed. It was surprising to Travis who volunteered. It wasn't just the brainiacs or the wallflowers. There was a jock here, a cool guy there, a cheerleader, all over the board, a complete slice of the school's makeup. Travis knew that each of the volunteers had some deep tie to the library, deep enough to pull these kids from their otherwise unbreakable roles. And he knew what that tie was. No matter what role these kids played in their normal lives, when they sat down to read, the world cracked open for them, became more real than normal. When school lit out, every last bit of cloud had fled the sky, and the day was warm and toasty. A perfect night for Halloween. This was the first Halloween either of his parents had missed. Even when his dad was bartending and taking classes at the same time, he always arranged to have Halloween off. For the last few years, his parents didn't go trick or treating with Travis, but they did dress up. His dad was always a zombie rock star, and his mom a zombie schoolteacher. They stayed home and gave out candy, and they were all together at the end of the night. But there was another message on the machine when Travis came home from school. His parents had to work late again. They were so sorry, they said. They just couldn't help. But Travis deleted the message before his mom finished talking. He knew their apologies were sincere, but they didn't make up for them not being around, not even close. It was horrible. His parents had been turned into an answering machine. Travis would not, he decided, heat up something, as his mom suggested. He was going to eat nothing but candy all night. In his room, he stood in front of the closet mirror and considered his costume. Both he and Hill had changed their minds about being hobos. The hobo costume was the easiest way out, they agreed, and Halloween should be more fun than that. Neither Hill nor Travis would let on. Both costumes were going to be surprises. Travis had gone through his drawers and closets and his parents' room too, and found what he needed. He wore an old pair of blue jeans, some clunky, old-fashioned shoes of his dad's, stuffed with socks, and a white shirt with black suspenders. He parted his hair in the middle and put gel on it to keep it down. It made him look old-fashioned. He looked exactly how he wanted to look. He was the ghost of young Steinbeck. Of course, he couldn't tell anyone that. It was too confusing a costume, requiring long explanations. Instead, he'd tell everyone he was a ghostwriter. A ghostwriter was someone who did all the writing for someone who couldn't actually write. And Travis thought his idea was funny. Ghost writer, get it? Even if people didn't get the joke, the word ghost would probably be enough to satisfy them. The only problem with the costume was the shirt. He found lots of white shirts, but they all had regular collars. Steinbeck's ghost wore a collarless shirt, and Travis knew that was the fashion of the time, almost 100 years ago. He found a white, long-sleeved linen shirt in his dad's closet that was perfect, except for the collar. So he took a pair of scissors and carefully cut off the collar. He was right. Perfect. But if Travis was going to be a ghostwriter, the shirt had to look like it belonged to a ghost who wrote a lot. He found his old calligraphy set and smudged black ink all over the shirt. He stared at himself as young Steinbeck for a moment longer, tried to see out of those eyes that looked out of the window, and imagined writing all those stories. Then he got to work on the makeup. He made a pale wash of his skin with smudged clown white. Then he darkened around his eyes with black eyeliner borrowed from his mom, bleeding it into gray on his cheekbones, around his nose, along the line of his jaw. Very ghostish. Ghosty? No, ghostiferous. That was a good word. He smudged and tweaked until he had the makeup just right, until he was unmistakably a member of the undead. The crowning touch, trickles of blood red lipstick from the corners of his mouth. He sprayed canned cobwebs up and down his body, over his head and arms, newly risen from the crypt. Last, he put his dad's best pen in his pocket, a fountain pen, and hung a composition book from a plastic prisoner's chain around his neck. The only thing that would have made the costume better was if he'd been able to have the pen protruding from his cheek or neck as if he'd been stabbed with it. He just couldn't figure out how to do it. His mom was good with stuff like that. She would know how. But one last glance. He was the ghostwriter. Hill picked up Travis at 6. They were in awe of each other's costumes and overjoyed they hadn't given in to the easy out of hobos. Hill was a perfect Day of the Dead figure, like one of the toy skeletons for sale at the mercados in Old Town. Skeletal bakers and musicians and priests. Hill's dad had turned his head into a sugar skull. Instead of blending the white and black to Travis's ghoulish gray, Hill's face and forehead were the brightest of whites. To emphasize the blocky shape of a skull, his dad used pure black under Hill's jaw and on his temples and around the eyes. His father had drawn long teeth on Hill's lips so that when his real mouth was closed, a skeleton's toothy grin showed. Pink and purple geometric patterns had been added for decoration to complete the sugar skull effect. It was hard to find the real Hill under the makeup. He wore white jeans and a white shirt over which he wore a black serape. On his feet he wore leather huaraches, and on his head a conical straw hat. He was a Day of the Dead gitano. In one hand he carried his plastic pumpkin, in the other an odd-looking garden tool. It's a short hoe, Hill said. They're illegal now. But for years they broke the backs of farm workers all over this valley. And now I have risen from the dead to wreak vengeance for my people. Hill cackled and slashed at the air. He was actually pretty scary. I shall wreak the vengeance, Hill said. And you, Senor Ghostwriter, you will create my legend. Together they cackled and set out. Travis turned off all the lights, inside and out. He hoped this would prevent angry trick-or-treaters from too much tricking. Dusk had already settled, purple-blue, but it was still warm out. The strong afternoon wind had died. The orange streetlights hummed. Travis stopped when they reached the sidewalk. Bella Linda Terrace had been transformed. Across the street, Mrs. Juarez was putting up a string of orange lights around her front windows. Glowing purple bats hung from the empty branches of her little trees. A smoldering cauldron invited children to her porch. Up and down the blocks, the houses were illuminated and decorated. Green and orange and purple lights shone on skeletons and headstones and giant spiders on roofs and in front yards. In open garages, black lights and strobe lights hinted at spookier goings on. It was a carnival of the dead. Bands of costumed kids, mostly little kids at this hour, roamed from house to house. Bella Linda Terrace was almost beautiful. You know, Hill said, it's like the Camazotz game out here, except all the creatures from the hidden worlds have broken out of their prisons. Cool. That's what Halloween's about, right? Travis said. The mysterious world and the real world meeting. It's way cool. They fell into the stream of the night, following trick-or-treaters from house to house, careful to not miss a single one. They traipsed behind ninjas and princesses, vampires, Harry Potters, a few Hermiones, frogs and cats, mummies, ghosts, robots. When they got to the second block, Hill started working the other side of the street. They'd never give out all their flyers working together. That plan worked better. But as the blocks went by and the candy piled up in their pumpkins, it got harder to make their spills about the library. More and more kids were out now, and they kept pushing past Travis to get to their candy. On one block, they saw two kids from school, duded up in serious Star Wars swag and toting their library pumpkins. Travis pulled Hill to a streetlight on a busy corner. We're just going to the houses, he said. Look at everybody else here. We're missing most of them. And there's a lot more trick-or-treaters than houses. If we stay here, they'll all have to walk past us. We'll get all the parents. Without blinking, Hill began to shout in a movie newsboy voice, Save our library! Save our library right here! In 1 hour, they got rid of all the flyers, talked to hundreds of parents, even some kids, and collected a ton of money. And best of all, everyone dropped candy into their pumpkins. They each earned a mountain of tooth-melting sugar. They went to Travis's house, where they counted the candy and the money. They'd collected $212.37. Travis had 135 pieces of candy. Hill had 177. An impressive haul all the way round. If each of the other pumpkins brought in close to the same amount of money, that would be over $1,000. Better than the car wash. Maybe people were finally getting the message. But they couldn't eat any more candy. And it was still pretty early, just after 9. It was Halloween. They couldn't stop now. So they went off in search of something spooky. A smudged moon rose from behind the gabilons. The streets were nearly empty. Only a few knots of older kids here and there. Bella Linda Terrace was still lit up, though for the first time since he'd moved here, it looked tired to Travis, a bit worn. He couldn't explain why this was a nice feeling. Hill knew a secret passage he'd been dying to show Travis. He led him to the bottom of Greentown Court, where, between the last two houses on the cul-de-sac, a narrow alley opened. "I think it's a maintenance thing," Hill said. "You know, so the gardeners and stuff can get behind the houses. They're all over the place, but this is the best one." Travis had not noticed these tight alleys before, and he'd lived here 5 months. He needed to pay more attention. The court was lit up, but empty. They looked around rather conspicuously, Travis thought, then whooshed into the alley. The path was a thick carpet of new grass, pale blue in the moonlight. Hill might have been here before, but no one else had. This was unknown territory. The stucco walls of the two-story houses, hard to know their color in this light, rose high above them, an impossible canyon. And higher still, the moon sat imperturbable in the sky, at its zenith, looking down on them, shining down on them. Hill crept along, bent low, as if he were a jewel thief on an escapade. All the white in his costume, his pants and skull and skeleton hands, was literally glowing. The black of his serape made him appear disjointed, floating. He really was a ghost. Travis discovered that he was moving the same way, hunched over, stealthy. "Hey," Travis whispered, "why are we walking like this? We're not really doing anything wrong." "I know," Hill whispered. "It's just more fun this way." The alley continued between the high fences of the backyards, then opened up into a flat area between the backs of the fences and the stone wall that circled Bella Linda Terrace. This area was like a moat around Bella Linda Terrace, but instead of water, the moat was filled with plants and large river stones and a few spindly trees. Travis realized for the first time that Bella Linda Terrace would be a much better place to live once the trees were fully grown. He could almost picture how the streets would look with big trees and their shade. "No man's land," Hill whispered, spreading his arms, "and it's all ours." Yeah, great. I mean, it's cool and all. But what now? What do you do with the no man's land anyway? "You escape." Hill trudged off through the thick carpet of ice plant. "We can't climb that wall. Look at the spikes." "Aha," Hill said. "You are a wise man, Ghost Rider. So, if you can't go over it, you go under it?" "Exactamente." When Hill got to the wall, he pasted himself against it like a convict during a prison break. Travis did the same. All Hill had to say was, "Well, Muggsy," and the two of them were on the ground howling, trying their best to stifle their laughter. Hill led them, crouching, to a drainage grate below one of the wall's big pillars. He pulled up the grate and invited Travis to jump in. Dude, we'll get all dirty, Travis said, only half serious. We are ghouls, Hill said. We do not concern ourselves with hygiene. Hill jumped into the hole, and it splashed a little when he landed. His head barely reached the top of the hole. He waved at Travis, then ducked down and was gone. Travis heard another grate being lifted. Then Hill's voice from the other side of the wall. Hurry up, ghoul boy, Hill's shout whispered. The spirits won't wait all night. Or will they? Travis jumped in the hole, ducked under the wall, and clambered out the other side. We made it, Muggsy, Travis snarled. Free at last. And they did the little dance of joy. They moved to the side of Veranda Road. They looked both ways. They were ghouls, not idiots. Then zipped across the empty street. The whole way, Travis hummed the Mission Impossible theme. Hill joined in on the high-pitched doodaloos. Travis had stood here before, in front of the barbed wire fence, looking up at the Gavilanes. He'd always wanted to go beyond this fence. He lifted his father's clunky old shoe and pushed down on the sagging wire between two barbs. Hill delicately climbed over. Hill held down the wire for Travis. They were on the other side. They swished through the dry grass up the gentle slope of the hill, not talking. The farther they went, the louder the silence that swallowed them. They came to a dead oak trunk lying on its side and sat on it, looking out across the valley. There was Bella Linda Terrace, all lit up in Halloween colors, and beyond it, Salinas. In the moonlight, Salinas seemed more a reflection of the moon's brilliance than a city of its own. Now what? Hill asked. I guess we wait for the spirits to rouse, or something. Because of the recent rain and the warmth that followed it, the earth beneath them breathed a sweet, soft smell into the night air. That smell was enough spirit for Travis. They sat without talking. They didn't need to talk. Every once in a while, a car would come down Boranda Street. One car honked all the way, filled with screaming passengers. High schoolers, Hill said, and he spit in the dirt. It was great just sitting there with Hill. Their friendship felt healed, back to where it should be, maybe even further along. Travis understood why he hadn't invited Hill to come along to the corral with Oster, why he hadn't invited him to follow the mystery he was following. He was afraid. He was afraid Hill would think the whole thing was stupid, childish, insane. He was afraid Hill would turn away from him. Mostly, he was afraid that Hill wouldn't be able to see the things Travis saw. Oster saw them, yes, but Hill? Oster had his reasons for seeing all this. If Travis asked Hill to see what he saw, it would be a test for Travis, not for Hill. If only he could find the right moment to tell his friend everything. Hill was talking about the Day of the Dead. He and his parents would go to the cemetery and offer sweets to one of his grandmothers. The other was still alive. And both his grandfathers. They would picnic in the cemetery, say some prayers, and talk to their ancestors just as if they were still alive. Travis felt something behind him. When he turned around, what he saw was more confusing than frightening. Orange lights bobbed in front of his eyes. Fireflies? No, there were no fireflies in California, and fireflies were green. He'd read about them in books. Then he realized the orange lights weren't in front of his face, they were farther up the hill. There was a ragged line of bobbing orange lanterns, 12 of them. No one held the lanterns. Hill, Travis whispered, do you see what I see? Hill turned, already starting to talk. But when he saw the lanterns, his mouth fell shut. After a long time, he said, I see them, Big T, but only if you see them. Do you see them? I'm afraid so. Lanterns? Looks like it, but I know. They stood at the same time, moved quietly up the hill after the orange lanterns. No matter how fast they moved or in which direction, the lanterns stayed far away. The lanterns moved to the top of the first ridge, spread out evenly along it, then disappeared over the other side. Whoa, Travis said. That about covers it, Hill said, but let me repeat. Whoa. They just stood there. And then Travis did it. He told Hill all the rest. Gitano and the Watchers, and finally Steinbeck's ghost. While Travis spoke, Hill stared up at the ridge where the lanterns had been. Travis stopped talking. Hill was silent. Well, what do you think, Hill? Am I crazy or what? No, man, you aren't crazy. I don't know that I believe in ghosts, like out of books, but I know what I saw just now, and I know you saw it, and whatever is happening to you with all this Steinbeck stuff, well, it can't be unreal. So you believe me? I have to, Hill said. You're my best friend. And besides, I saw those lanterns too. If you're crazy, then I'm crazy. And that's okay. At least we have each other to talk to. Really? Really, man. No lie. But I swear, you have got to take me to the corral with you. Travis sighed. Finally, he told Hill. Travis' shoulders seemed to unscrunch. He seemed to be taller than just a moment before. Finally, the world below them, the great and long Salinas Valley, seemed infinite. The moon had moved past its zenith, west toward the ocean. Without a word between them, the two friends turned and headed back down to Bella Linda Terrace. Every few steps, one of them would say, "Whoa." Halfway down the hill, a thought flew into Travis' head. The moonlight was so bright he could read in it, write in it. "Hold up," Travis said. He opened his ghostwriter composition book, took out his father's pen, and scribbled these words: "The night so bright, even Bella Linda Terrace is beautiful. Halfway to home with a good friend." He shut the book before the ink had time to dry. The words would be smeared, but that didn't matter. They were written. Next, we'll do chapter 15. See you then.